want to welcome everybody to Temple Ben Torah. My name is Rabbi Mimi Dickner. I'm the rabbi here, and it is our pleasure to host this event. I want to say that I think this is both a powerful and beautiful thing that we're doing and a risky thing that we're doing. I want to acknowledge that. That the issues that we're discussing and the book that we're discussing are, for most of us, not abstract issues. These issues affect us personally. These issues are affecting people we love, a place that we love. And of course we're discussing these issues not in a time of calm. We're discussing these issues in a time of incredible violence and bloodshed and immense uncertainty and fear. And so for that reason, I'm both really glad we're doing this because it feels like important conversations to be having. But I also want to name, it's also not the easiest thing to be doing in the world. And it's certainly been my experience as a rabbi that the kind of disagreement that we're seeing on the issues have become incredibly difficult to engage. And this is true just within the Jewish community alone. So to be having these conversations as an interfaith group, sort of all the more so. But I think for us, for both of us, it feels deeply important that we figure out how to create spaces where the humanity of all people are honored, and where we figure out how to have space in our hearts for everybody's humanity and stories and perspectives, which is not easy to do in the world right now, but is deeply needed, and is not the only thing that's needed to move forward, but is a key piece. And so I'm really glad that everybody's here today to be part of that work. And I want to sort of bless us this afternoon as we hear from each other, that we can really find the space in our hearts to hear different perspectives from our own, and that we find the ability to listen with resilience and to listen with openness, knowing that everybody here is cherishing one another's humanity and goodness at the end of the day. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I want to turn it over to Shaheen to offer some words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Mimi. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. I am Shaheen Akhtar. Most of you know me, and I'm passionate about building bridges. I'm a peacemaker, and I love Dalai Lama, what he said once. He said that we have been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet our neighbor. I think Mimi and I do not fit that mold. After what you said. The reason I say is that, like Mimi said, at this particular moment in history, it is critical that we get together and reach out to one another. And I have been reaching out for over 30 years. So I was thinking, if I don't do this now, then what is the point? What is the purpose? Why am I here on this earth? So I wasn't disappointed when I was reaching out to folks and not getting any responses. So that was, I did my part. So I reached out to Mimi, and she accepted my invitation. Thank you, Mimi. So we are here. I feel like Mimi and I are modeling this, like in the story, Dali Ashkenazi and Bashir Perry. They, in the midst of the conflict, they find friendship. They find friendship, and they try to understand each other's history and acknowledge it, and try to work things out. So their story offers us space for healing and space for change. I know it's but we need to be on that road. We don't know the destination, but we need to at least find the road. And this is why we thank you all for joining us, because we want to invest in this. We want to capitalize on what the story ends in such a beautiful way, in a profound way. The question is not whether God can bring peace to the earth. The question is, can we work together? Can we work together? So as we leave this room, and I want all of us to think about what can we do? What can we do? How can we invest? Whatever, we all have skills. We all have expertise in some areas. I read this book when it was published in 2006. And I was invited to a church book club meeting. So this book brings back a lot of sad memories for me, because that was 20 years ago. And at that time, I thought that I will get to see peace in my lifetime. But, you know, I've grown 20 years older, and things have gotten worse. No words to describe the destruction and the loss of lives. Eyes cannot see anymore. And I just read yesterday that the UN aid organizations have put out this statement that warning that it is the entire Palestinian population in northern Gaza is at imminent risk of dying due to violence and starvation and disease. So, do I still have hope? Should I still have hope? Let's listen to the summary of the story by Sandy Tolan, and then you will hear our speakers. But before that, I want to invite all of us to take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and say, I am peace. I am peace. And then breathe out that peace around you. And connect your hearts with the words you will be hearing. With the affirmation that each life is a universe worth honoring and protecting. Thank you. Yes. Would you like to come?
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Howard Burkus. Every house tells a story. In Ramla, in Israel, there's a house with two tales, one Jewish, one Arab. In 1967, a Palestinian man cautiously approached the house, which had been his boyhood home.
I'm afraid. Should I knock forcefully and risk intimidating the people inside? Or knock softly and risk that the people would not hear me?
Bashir al-Khari stood at the home his father built, wondering about the lemon tree his father planted in the yard. Bashir's family was forced from the stone house in 1948 after the creation of the State of Israel and before an Israeli family moved in.
And I said, is it possible for me to come in and see the house?
And I opened the door and I said yes to come in.
Dalia Ashkenazi opened the door to the house and to a friendship. Reporter Sandy Tolan first told of their search for understanding in a 1998 radio documentary heard on the NPR program Fresh Air. Since then, Tolan has dug deeper, tying the history of the two families and the house that connected them to the history of Palestinian-Israeli conflict. His new book is called The Lemon Tree, an Arab, a Jew, and the Heart of the Middle East.
Dalia's family came from Bulgaria in late 1948. They were Bulgarian Jews who emigrated to Israel, got on a boat, sailed 7 days, and arrived in the Israeli port town of Haifa. Her father, Moshe, heard of a town called Ramle And so they were among the first 300 Jewish immigrants to arrive, mostly from Europe. And they came to this town and they saw this nice house with a lemon tree in the backyard and they moved into it.
So both Dahlia and Bashir were young children when one left the house and the other moved in. Both had very different perceptions, though, about why and how Bashir's family left. You quote a letter that Bashir wrote to Dahlia many years later about why his family left. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading that.
We were exiled by force of arms. We were exiled on foot. We were exiled, but we left our souls, our hopes, and our childhood in Palestine. We left our joys and sorrows. We left them with each lemon fruit, with each olive. We left them in the flowering tree that stands with pride at the entrance of our house in Al-Ramla. We left them hoping to return.
And Dahlia had a completely different view of this, and she spoke with you about that for your radio documentary. Let's hear Dahlia's side of that story.
From time to time I would ask my parents and other people who were the people who lived in these Arab houses before and why did they leave. And yeah, we were always told, yeah, people fled and left the boiling soup on the table, you know. So it sounded like some kind of a cowardly escape.
It's actually 19 years before Bashir has the opportunity to go back and visit his former home. And Dahlia answers the door and invites him in. And that meeting begins this sort of lifetime of conversation.
Dahlia said, I have never seen people like you. You're strange. You don't just like your homeland, you adore your homeland. You adore the trees, you adore the fruits, you adore the earth, everything. I don't understand this attachment. I told her, I think I have an answer for that. For us, the lemon fruit is not. This lemon is homeland. This lemon is Ramleh. This lemon is Palestine.
And I am a child of Zion. For me, Zion means something very different than it means to him. For me, Zion is the mountain of God. For me, it's an expression of my very ancient longing. For me, it's a word that symbolizes a harbor for my people and our collective expression here. And for him, it's a regime of terror.
2 years after they had first met in 1969, Bashir is accused by the Israelis of taking part in a terrorist attack on a supermarket. He then ends up spending a total of 15 years over time in prison. He's also deported. But he never really tells you, at least in the book, we don't learn for sure whether he was actually involved in those attacks on Israelis or not. What do you believe about that?
I don't know. He was convicted of it in an Israeli military court. He denies it, and yet he told me, as I wrote in the book, that I understand that the means were violent. He believed that his family was usurped of its land, that the Palestinians were expelled, and that since the right of return was not granted, that we have to take whatever means are necessary. Now, to Dahlia, what he did, what she believes he did, was a terrorist act. And every time I've asked him, he said, no, he's not guilty of that.
Dahlia realizes that their friendship can't bridge this deep divide between Israelis and Palestinians and really between them.
Yes and no. I mean, at times she would tell me, you know what, I'm not comfortable with the word friendship, because friends choose each other, and we have each other whether we like it or not.
I love my country, and you love your country, and I love your country too, and it is the same country. And I have nowhere else to go, and you have nowhere else to go. So we are here, and nobody will dream the other way. And our enemy is the only partner we have.
And as she told me, it was something beyond friendship, and here he is, and I can close the door again, but now I know the history, and I know something about what makes this guy tick and what this family has endured over these years.
So what happened to the house?
Well, what happened was that she had been thinking about what way could one acknowledge that there were two histories in this house. And so she came and requested a meeting with Bashir, and he was happy to meet with her. And she said, Bashir, what shall we do? Maybe I could sell the house and give the proceeds to your family. He said, no, we cannot sell our patrimony. And she said, well, what do you think we should do? And he said, well, I lost my childhood there. I would like this house to be turned over as a kindergarten for the Arab children who now live in the town of Ramleh. And she and her husband readily agreed, and they also said, look, at a later point they said, we want this to be a center of dialogue for Arab and Jew, called the Open House. And that's what it became, both an Arab kindergarten and a center for encounter between Arab and Jew.
What happened to the lemon tree?
Well, in 1998, the lemon tree died. And a few years later, Dahlia, with some Arab and Jewish children, went out and planted another one. Bashir wasn't able to come because he's not allowed to go to Israel from Ramallah. But she planted it with the hopes that one day both families could enjoy the fruits of this lemon tree.
The book is The Lemon Tree, an Arab, a Jew, and the Heart of the Middle East, and the author is journalist Sandy Tolan. Sandy, thanks for joining us.
Howard, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You can...
So now I'd like to invite, sorry. So this is Dr. Iman Ansari. She's Palestinian, and she's a pediatrician, works at the Boston Children's Hospital. Thank you, Iman.
You're welcome.
She has
Do you want me to speak in the microphone
Yes.
or?
No,
Yes.
microphone.
Microphone.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Iman Al-Khadra. My husband's last name is Ansari, so I became Iman Ansari. And I'll start by saying Al-Khadra was so difficult to pronounce for a lot of people. They would say Al-Khandra, Al-Kandra, and other ways of butchering it. So when I became a U.S. citizen, I thought, okay, this will be easy. I'll be Ansari. And from there on, every time I introduce myself, hi, I'm Dr. Ansari, the response is, you don't have to be sorry. So, there's no winning. There's no winning. So I'll tell you who I am, and then I'm going to tell you how this book touches me. So I am a Palestinian. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia for two parents who are distantly related. My father, his name is Samih. He was 8 years old in 1948. My mother, her name is Bushra, and this is her younger sister, my aunt. She was 3 years old, and she was born in Haifa before 1948. She was 3 in 1948 at the time of the Nakba. My family was forcibly displaced. They were displaced under gunfire. They did not fled. There were no soups on a stove, nothing. Like that story did not resonate with me whatsoever. There was a war, and actually the remnants of that war and the accolades of that war are still displayed in Safed, which is my hometown. And in Hebrew now they changed the name as of 1948, and they made it, instead of Safed, they made it Tzfad. But historically, even in Jewish history, the name was Safed, S-A-F-E-D. So that is my hometown. My parents moved to Syria. They grew up there, and they got married and moved to Saudi Arabia, where I was born and raised. My mother's father, my grandfather on my mom's side, her father, was a lawyer. So they were educated and they fared very well. My father's side of the family, they were merchants. So they went into abject poverty. And my father became the only educated child in that family because he insisted on education. He graduated, he would tell me, the second on his class because he went to jail just before exams in pharmacy school. Brilliant guy. No matter what I do in life, Harvard faculty, top in my class, even Nobel Prize would not impress him because he had lived through a lot. And then we were born in Saudi Arabia, Palestinians. Even if I don't say I'm a Palestinian, everyone knows from my last name, I'm a Palestinian. We were raised in a home that told us to be proud for being Palestinians. Palestinians have been given a huge responsibility. They are from the land of the prophets. They have a huge responsibility to live up to being from the land of the prophet. I can't be the second on the class because I'm not missing a frontal lobe or something. I have to be the top of the class. I cannot misbehave. I'm a Palestinian. How dare I misbehave? Our food, our attire, our everything was a source of pride and celebration. The land of Saudi Arabia celebrated me. So in Saudi Arabia, every Palestinian is looked at as someone who is brilliant, as someone who is hardworking, as someone who is trustworthy, as a merchant, as a doctor, as so many things. Growing up for 24 years in Saudi Arabia, I was so proud to say I'm a Palestinian because Palestinian is a good thing. There was a trademark in being Palestinian. The trademark is excellent, honesty, and that's how I grew up. My father told us stories at times, not all the time, but told us stories about how he was pushed out of his city. He was 8 years old, he remembers everything. He remembered his school, he remembered so many things. So, fast forward, as an American citizen, I decided to go and visit. My parents are still alive. Neither of them has been able to visit since my mom was 3 and my dad was 8. So I managed to go there. And the first day I arrived there was the day of the massacre of Christ Church in New Zealand. In March of 2019, I arrived to the Aqsa Mosque and I fell to the ground and I started crying. I did not believe this day would ever happen. I did not believe as a Palestinian I will ever be able to see my land. And I was there as an American praying the Friday prayer because New Zealand was ahead of us. So the massacre happened at the Friday prayer several hours before I was able to cross through the border from Jordan. And I prayed with my kids. They saw their hometown because my husband is from Jerusalem. They saw their family, my in-laws. And in a few days, we made it up to Haifa. And my father knew that on that particular day, I'm going to drive up from Haifa to Safad. He called me in the morning. I told him, Baba, the kids didn't eat breakfast yet. And he yelled at me, this is not time for breakfast. Just get going. I need to see my hometown. And I told him, sure. So we were in the German colony in Haifa, next to a place called Fatouche. And the kids were eating. I told them, we're not eating, we'll eat in the car. And I told my dad, Baba, let's hang up the phone. I'm going to call you from Safad when I get up there. He yelled at me again. And he told me, no, I want to see my homeland. I want to see you drive all the way on FaceTime. So he was with me on FaceTime, driving from Haifa all the way to Safad, and then touring Safad, and then at the end of 4 hours, while he's on FaceTime, don't ask me about how much this cost, but for him, this was priceless. We cried, we laughed. As soon as I arrived to the old city in Safad, he asked me to get off from the car because he doesn't know how to direct me anywhere while I'm inside the car, but he can direct me on foot. So I went out of the car on foot. He took me to his home. We found his home. And then he took me through, he told me there's a big garden, bustan, in between his home and school. It's a small garden. But everything is different dimensions from a child to an adult. And he walked me to his school. He said, oh, they painted it differently now. It looks a bit different. And then he told me, why don't you go to the top of the citadel? Because that's where I used to see the Sea of Galilee on a clear day. Wow. And I went up. And then he asked me to go, if anyone has been to Safad, he asked me to walk through the small street. And then there is a small bridge over the street. And he said, there was a chain hanging from there. I didn't find the chain. I told him 70-something years later, the chain is not there. However, I found where the chain was hanging, and I took a picture of it. He showed me his father's store. He showed me the other store in the other place. That was the store his father rented to a Jewish neighbor. So, here is where this book is so moving. This is the story of every 1948 and every 1967 and every 2024 Palestinian. We love being Palestinians. We are proud of being Palestinians. We are surprised when people use Palestinian as a slur or look at us as if we're less. I do not understand it. As a physician who did anatomy, who dissected people, who studied physiology, who teaches all of that, I don't see how people find a way to think that one is better than the other. We're all the same. We're all the same. And that goes in every way. That goes to Palestinians who may think they're different than others, and that goes to others who think that Palestinians are any less. The trauma. One of the hardest things on me is watching my parents. My aunt was not born, she's young. But watching my parents watch what's happening right now. They've lived this horror once before, and they're watching it unfold many folds over right now. My dad, I would tell you, never forgot Palestine and never forgot Safed. And Safed is something that is being invoked all the time. And I'll give you a small example about that. So, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. We traveled to Switzerland where I used to ski. We traveled to Austria where I used to ski. I went to my first opera with my dad. I love classical music. I like to wake up to Tchaikovsky. That's how I like to wake up in the morning too. So, one time, the stereo did not work, and I got very upset, and I was cranky in the morning, and my dad, of course, stormed into the room, yelling at me, telling me, "We did not have Tchaikovsky in Safed. Just get up and go to your school." Safed is the thing we talk about all the time. It's the anchor of his existence. He is the anchor of my existence. Psychological trauma doesn't leave. There is a book by a psychiatrist called The Body Keeps the Score. I really highly recommend it.
What is it called?
The Body Keeps the Score. We move on. We outgrow some of the trauma, but it doesn't leave all the way. There are scars. My parents were scarred. The new generation of children right now, my dad is 8. Imagine all the children that are surviving what's happening right now. They will all be scarred. And these scars will manifest in so many ways. That psychological trauma of everyone who's traumatized. And I'm going to talk only about the Palestinians because I'm a Palestinian, but the same goes for any traumatized group of people. And of course, I acknowledge the Jewish trauma over so many years. But this trauma doesn't leave us. And this trauma manifests in so many ways. For me, watching the kids, I'm a pediatrician. I'm a mother of 4. They suffer here, but nothing compared to the suffering of the kids in Gaza. Gaza right now has the largest number of amputees in the world. When you see a picture of amputee anywhere, on Instagram, anywhere, the first thing that will come to your mind, are they from Gaza? Because Gaza has the largest number of amputees in the world. Most of them are kids. So they either get killed, they're maimed, or psychologically scarred for life. And I'm bearing witness. One of the hardest things that people tell me right now, what is the hardest thing for you right now? I would tell them, the hardest thing is that my own tax dollars are killing kids. My own tax dollars are killing my kids over there, my family over there. How do I sleep at night? How do we sleep at night? I don't know if anyone of you heard me speak on the radio. I had a clip that was on WBUR a year ago. I think it was still in October. Me and my Israeli friend talking about our shared humanity, how we see each other as people. as humans. We had a follow-up one this year. I just invited Yossi Halavekline, who wrote the book Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor. In it, by the way, he emphasizes that the biggest obstacle to peace is the inability to listen to each other's narrative. The Palestinian narrative is missing. Not many Palestinians are in the media. Not many Palestinians are sharing their narrative. So, Yossi and my neighbor, I mentioned that I live next to Temple Emmanuel, to some of the people I met earlier. One of my neighbors is Rabbi Wes Garden Schwartz, and he keeps telling me, you're exceptional. You're very special. And my answer is, I'm not special. I can't be special. Genetically, anatomically, physiologically, I'm a human. I'm not special. But I was born to a family that loved me, and in a country that loved me, and in a society that loved me. I grew up happy. I grew up feeling proud of who I am. Put me in the same environment Palestinians are in right now, oppressed, sieged, bombed, chased constantly, and see if I'll be special. The reverse is true also. Take Palestinians out of that environment. Stop the siege, stop the occupation, stop the oppression, stop the bombing, stop the chasing, and you will see me there with every one of them. We're all the same. We're all the same people. I don't know if anyone likes Amor Towles. I've read any of his books. So I attended an event to Amor Towles. He's a great writer, and he doesn't write about Palestine and Israel, just so you know. But in an event he had at the Emerson Theater, he said, there's no good person and bad person. There's no generous person and hateful person. There is no stingy or anything like that. There are circumstances that bring certain aspect out of people. We're all generous when we feel happy. And we're all very, very hateful when we are afraid. Stop what's happening to the Palestinians, and you will see me in every one of these Palestinians. If we stop the fear, we will all be very loving and very generous. So, the question now comes, why am I here today? There's a war in Gaza happening, and I'm here talking to you about my family, about, a book. Why am I driving all the way from Newton to here to tell you this? Because the most important thing I've discovered reading and reading and reading about the Palestinian-Israeli horror of the past 100 years is that Palestinians are not seen as people, are not seen as equal, are not seen as deserving, are not seen as of the same humanity. And that needs to change. And once we change that, we would be able to read this book, which I would call it, Palestine-Israel 101. It's really barely scratching the surface. Then when you read it, just change the names, just change the characters. Make the Jewish person the Palestinian and the Palestinian person the Jewish. And you will feel empathy. I felt empathy all along since I came to the US reading about the Holocaust, the Jewish massacres, the pogroms, and all of this. Do the same and scratch the names and read about the Jews as if they're Palestinians and the Palestinians as if they're the Jews. And that is empathy. And then read the book and you will see. When you read the book, you will also see that we need to operate from the same facts. There are certain things that are not facts. My story is very different than the story from the other side for a reason, because we're not dealing with the same facts. For example, my parents were forcibly expelled. That's a fact. That's a fact that even the new Jewish Israeli historians have written, but somehow the narrative was, we just walked away and left our homes. And that is not true. Land without people. The land had people. And the people are not some Arabs wandering and they could go anywhere else and dissolve in Arab countries. That's where my dad was born, and his dad, and his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. One thing that I share with Bashir, he's originally from Morocco. We are originally from Morocco. But for hundreds of years, we are from the land of Palestine. No one should have taken our home. No one should take my home in Newton. No one should take it in Palestine. The goal of transferring Palestinian has been a goal since Theodore Herzl wrote his first book. This is not new. A land without people, if there were people, the goal was to transfer them out. That has been there all along. That's not a lie. Please read and verify that. It's not only in this book, it's in a lot of references. When people open their minds and hearts, they will find them. Terrorists for the British in the 1930s are the government of Israel today. So everyone who was labeled as a terrorist, from Haganah, from Irgun, Jabotinsky, all of these were labeled as terrorists. And right now, whenever I talk about Palestinians, people call me terrorist, because Palestinians are terrorists. And I tell them that's not true. Not all Palestinians are using violence. And even if they were using violence, haven't the Jewish people used violence at the beginning of the century? Haven't these people been labeled, from Menachem Begin to Dayan to so many other people, have been labeled as terrorists? Again, facts. The Moral Army was looting. Palestinians were driven out of their homes and their homes were looted. So many facts in there. Step 3, so step 1, humanity. Step 3, read the book and figure out the true facts. And step 3, we should fix our mental biases and mental noise. Basically, consider the opposite. Use self-distancing. Consider yourself not Palestinian, not Arab, not Jewish, and read the book. And see. I hope you find empathy for both people, but the solution is not what we have right now. And then, the word peace, by the way, that we talk about right now a lot, it's not in the Jewish state of Theodore Herzl, not in Jabotinsky's Iron Wall. There is no word peace. Peace with the Arabs and peace with the Palestinians has never been mentioned. It's not in the Declaration of Independence of Israel. There is no word peace with the Arabs. And then, not in nation state of 2018. There is a law, right now, the law of the land in Israel, as of 2018, that if you're not Jewish, you do not have rights in that country. And that's why Druze and so many Palestinian Israelis are upset, because it's apartheid. It's two-rank system, basically. And finally, I'm going to end on this note. On Sufi, which is a practice of Islam, they're the mystics. That's why we went to Safad. And it's basically the descendant of our practice in Morocco. We call it the Shadri. And one of the Sufi mystics that everyone knows is Rumi. And Rumi once said, what did he say? Out of the place of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. So, no one is right, no one is wrong, but we need to figure out the facts, and we need to move forward. We are one tribe. Thank you.
Amen.
Okay, so thank you so much. I don't even have words at the moment. I'm just processing. And I want to, we have more folks who are, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of taking in the whole story. I'm really powerful. And we're going to bring some more voices into the room. I want to invite Father Carl Chudy to share a few remarks. And just thinking about the time, maybe a few minutes each.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am not Palestinian, and I am not Jewish. I'm a Roman Catholic priest. And I am here in solidarity with my Jewish and Muslim neighbors. And I have never been to Palestine, but I have heard many of the stories both in Palestine and Israel. And I think for us as Christians, I was just Googling all the Christians in Palestine. And I wanted to just give you a list. So the Christians in Palestine are Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, Syrian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, Maronites, from our Maronite friends in Lebanon, Ethiopian Orthodox, and Baptist evangelical groups as well. Very varied group, small, of course, in population compared to the rest of the population. So in a sense, what I'm trying to do here is to, and many of us who are Christian, who are standing in solidarity with our Muslim and Jewish neighbors. In a time where there is grief and anger and a deep-seated hope. And I've always found, I don't know about you, it's much easier to hold up grief together. So I wanted to share with you, just real brief, I know there's just not much time, a story. The Christians here in Holliston last May held a program that has been going on for 50 years in Holliston called the World Day of Prayer. Actually, it's been going on internationally since the 19th century. And it's an ecumenical project that's been going on with many Christians around the world, praying each and every year. This year, coincidentally, the prayer was prepared by Palestinian Christian women. And the prayer, actually the preparation happened before the attack of Hamas in Israel. So Hamas wasn't included in this prayer. But I wanted to share with you one story of a number of stories that were shared with us by Palestinian Christians there. I want to share a story with you that shows what it means to be a Palestinian in our land. My grandparents used to live in Jaffa. They grew up there before 1948, living alongside other Christians, Muslims, and Jews. When the state of Israel was created in 1948, it was a catastrophe for Palestinians who had lived on the land, came to my grandparents' home, and, like you, kicked them out by force. This caused my grandparents to become refugees in Jordan. Many years later, my grandparents came for a visit to Jerusalem, and my parents took me and my siblings on a trip to Jaffa. They were excited to show us the home they used to live in. My grandpa, in fact, that's how we found the house. Everything had changed except for the trees, which helped us to identify the place, like the lemon tree. Sadly, the people currently living in the house were hostile toward us. I was quite young, but I do remember them shouting and kicking us away from the house. It was like we wanted to go into the house. We were just viewing it from the outside. It wasn't like we wanted to go in. We tried to explain to them, telling them that this used to be our house. However, they refused to hear it in part. The feeling must have been even worse for my grandfather, being kicked out of his own house twice. Later time, when I visited my grandparents in Jordan, my grandma showed the keys that her mom had kept when leaving their house. She had kept the keys with the hope that one day they would be able to return to their home. In fact, the person who shared this story brought the keys with them to our prayer. She kept the keys with hope. Sadly, following the two Nakbas in 1948, 1967, even until today, people are still being kicked out of their homes. Many had kept their keys with hope. Sort of like the lemon tree itself, the keys. And as they passed on through many generations. I know that the tree from which I came is strong and resilient. I am nourished by the love of my ancestors. I can bear with others in love because they do. So just to say, for those of us who are Christian, we stand with all of you together in all of this, in prayer and in hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Carl. So now I'd like to invite Robert Meissner, my friend, for her reflection. Thank you again for providing the space for healing and grief.
Of course. So I wrote something, but I want to say something different, actually, based on what we've been talking about this afternoon. And I thought I would also share a little bit about my family, how I got here, which I think my grandfather used to say our story is the Jewish story. And so I want to share that a little bit with you and how it brought me to where I am. So, like many people in the Jewish community, my family has lived in many places. My father's side of the family for hundreds of years lived in Poland. When my sister and I made a decision to go to Poland, we went to the archives and we looked, and they keep amazing archives, thankfully, and they showed us generation after generation of people in our family with our last name living in Poland. I think many people know the story of what happened in Poland starting in 1939 with the war. 90% of the Jewish community was decimated. My family was included in this. My grandmother and grandfather are both from Eastern Poland. And my father's mother, at the age of 9, went with her family and just kept fleeing east. Many Jews went to the former Soviet Union to flee the Nazis and ended up living in Tajikistan for 6 years during the war. My grandfather, by himself, escaped from his town in eastern Poland. His whole family, most of his family, were killed. As a teenager, he survived in a Siberian work camp. And after the war, my grandfather ended up in Canada, which is where I grew up, but my grandmother ended up in Israel, like so many people of the time, and moved to Bat Yam, which is kind of a suburb of Tel Aviv. And there was just this sense from her, but echoed, I think, in so many of the lives of the people who raised me and who I knew, that this was the option. This was the option. And I remember hearing stories of my grandfather after surviving the war in Siberia and going back into Poland to find his family and looking for his brother and seeing just how much anti-Semitism was still part of the reality of the place, and just knew it wasn't an option to stay. And so he ended up in Canada, as I said. My mother's side of the family is from Chile. They went there in the 19th century or the late 19th century, as many people in the Jewish community did. Many went to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. And they lived there and got involved in what's called a labor Zionist youth movement. They were part of Hashomer and Zahir, which was sort of committed to both socialist values and Zionist values. And in a context of kind of political instability in Chile and a deep sense and desire to be part of this historic project, my family moved to Israel for a period of time. And in 1973, which some folks might know was what the Jewish community calls the Yom Kippur War, my grandfather's brother was in the army and he was killed in the war. And this was a turning point moment for my family where kind of two things happened. One is they said, we can't stay here. This is not a safe place for our children, and they left. But another thing that they learned was this way of being is untenable. This is not a way that anybody in this place will get to live with freedom or dignity or peace. This is not the answer. And so, as much as I was both raised in a family that was deeply connected to Israel, a deeply Zionist family, I was also raised in a family that taught me that the status quo is not okay, and that the only way that everybody who lives there is going to get to live a life of freedom and peace and dignity, which is what everybody wants, and what our people have been denied for centuries, is if we figure out how to have peace, how to have a different way. And so those have always been the values that I've been raised with. And I spent my own time, I talked a little bit about this on Rosh Hashanah this year, I spent my own time living in Jerusalem, and for the first time in my life met Palestinians. I spent time in the West Bank, and you spoke a little bit about, we have to kind of talk about the history and learn the history. It was entirely unknown to me what Palestinians had experienced and were experiencing. And it turned my world upside down to hear their stories. And I said to myself, I need to be part of changing this. I don't want to be part of a movement of exclusivism that says it's me or you. You know, we can't be pitted against each other. I feel that we've been pitted against each other. We've been pitted against each other as though there's not enough space in the world for all of us to have what we need. And I think I'll speak for the Jewish community, this has engendered in us a tremendous amount of fear. Our people are deeply afraid. And I want to say that. I want people to understand that. That in this time of violence, but really for so long, the Jewish people are deeply afraid. And we want to feel like we are wanted and welcome and belong in the world. And it is a deeply painful thing that for centuries that has not been true for the Jewish people. So I'll wrap this up and say that I refuse to be confused about what's true. That we, first of all, can't figure out a different way because we can, and that we are enemies in a zero-sum game. We're not, and we don't have to live that way. So I want to choose Okay, I'll turn it back to you, Shaheen.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you. I'll give you a hug. Thank you. Thank you.
Shaheen's a great hugger.
I want to do the same. Thank you. So now I wish we had more time, and this really, really tells me that we need to get together more. And thank you again. It's really been gratifying to be here and hear the stories. Now I'm going to invite Hani Murad. And the interesting thing about Hani is he's married to a Jewish, his wife is Jewish. Here we have a great example. Yes, we can live together, right? Peace.
Very close.
Right, right. Okay, let's welcome Hani.
Okay, thank you for having me. And thank you for inviting us to be with you this afternoon. It's a really pleasure to be with you. Yeah, I'm married to a
Excuse,
Jewish
could you
person.
please use the microphone?
Certainly. Thank you. So, yeah, I was born in Nazareth a few years ago. And I lived there until my early 20s. I went to Harvard University for a bachelor's degree. And I experienced firsthand living under Israeli rule. For Israelis, Israeli Arabs they call us, which is, to me, is really kind of insulting kind of label. At least I take it personal that it's really insulting to me to call me Israeli Arabs, as if we haven't existed before Israel was created. And as if we have no connection to the rest of the Palestinian society. So we're no different from those who live in Jaffa, in Haifa, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, in Nablus, in Safed, or anywhere else. We're part of the Palestinian community. So my experience with this book and Al-Nakba really goes back to just trying to understand what happened to us in Galilee, where my family was able to stay, and they live in Galilee right right now, just north of Nazareth. And to growing up to be unsure who we are really as people. Because on the one hand, we are called Israeli Arabs, but we're not really treated equally as Israelis, even back then. Just another historical fact that once Israel was created in 1948, the Palestinian community inside Israel that was supposed to be citizens of the country were under military rule. And that lasted from 48 to 66. Meaning, if anybody wanted to leave the village to go outside to the city, they needed a permit from the governor, the military governor of that region or province. And talking about what happened to the rest of the Palestinians was really a topic that my parents and grandparents kind of avoided saying much about it. I think in their view was something that happened of so enormous traumatic event that probably they didn't want to talk about it, but also was a way to survive living inside Israel. Because anybody who showed any kind of nationalistic aspirations or any ideas of belonging to that community in terms of having aspirations of having connection to other people of Palestinian descent outside was kind of catering to the enemy kind of thing. So self-determination for Palestinians inside Israel was not a topic that my parents wanted to discuss or my grandparents. My experience as growing up with Al-Nakba, or the stories of the book, this book, the Lemon Tree book that talks about, was through the friends that I had in elementary school and later in high school, who were refugees, maybe for the lack of a better word, from other villages around my town. And to see the anguish and pain for those kids and their families who just live maybe 5 kilometers, like Safuri, for example, anybody knows the geography there, and about maybe 5 or 6 kilometers away from my village. And we have a big Safuri people present in our village. And they can't go back to the lands that they had, to the homes that they had. And actually, they are considered absentees. They haven't died, they're still living and breathing, but they're considered absentees. And therefore, their property is under the, there's a particular office in the government that handles the absentee properties. So, so that's my childhood kind of. There's too much to it, but I think it's too short to go on for more than that. So I grew up and I became an adult, and I came to the United States in the late 80s. My profession is in psychology. I'm a psychologist. So when we talk about trauma, I understand what trauma is, and I understood what trauma is even before studying psychology. But I saw it really face to face when I worked with the United Nations. I worked with the United Nations from 2004 to 2018, and I was stationed in Jerusalem. I covered Gaza as well, and I spent half my time in Gaza. And to live in Gaza, even just for 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, was a horrendous thing. And I'm talking about a privileged person like me. I was considered international, and that also another kind of privilege. But to see the day-to-day life of people in Gaza was really, really traumatizing to me as an observer, let alone for somebody who lived there. During my tenure with the UN, I experienced 8 wars on Gaza. I'm not talking about 2013. From 2006 to 2014, I experienced 4 wars, and I was present in Gaza during those wars. The level of destruction that I witnessed in 2014 was unimaginable. We're talking 2014. 2014 pales in comparison to what's going on now. It's maybe one there, in thousands. But in 2014, the Shajaiya neighborhood was totally destroyed. The pictures that I took and the damage that I witnessed is just unbelievable. About 2,200 people were killed in 2014, 2,200. About 800 children were among those. And there was a house that was bombed by the Israelis and 27 people of that family were killed. The Israeli army will not allow us to go and check on them. And after 30 days, when we were able to go as United Nations, most of their bodies were eaten by stray dogs. That's the scene that I witnessed. So, I don't want to even go to 2013 because there's no description that would fit the whole. It has been really difficult for me for the past year to have a good night's sleep. I haven't slept in 13 months. I sleep maybe 2-3 hours, and I feel that I aged about 25 years in 1 year. During my tenure in Gaza for 14 years or so, I developed very close friendships with the people of Gaza, with colleagues that I worked with, and I have lost more than 100 people, friends and colleagues in Gaza, 2013. Some of them have vanished. The whole family has been killed, nobody has lived. And I don't want to give you numbers because probably you know it already, but the magnitude of the disaster is unimaginable. And 2013 is really like the pinnacle of the trauma, the pinnacle of the tragedy. 1948 was a big turning point, but 2013 even much, much worse than 48. So, how do I get up in the morning? It's really hard. It's really hard to get up in the morning. But I still have hope, and I still find a little optimism here and there. And some days I kind of lose faith in humanity for how we, as a human being, could be silent. Certainly, the Jewish people have experienced that during the Second World War, and before that, during the background in Ukraine and Russia, and even before that, in 1290, Edward I kicked every Jew from England. So anti-Semitism is real. And bigotry and racism is real. And it's our responsibility and job as human beings to fight it. But we also have to be willing to speak out against systems of oppression. We need to be able to be courageous enough to speak up when governments and political systems abuse other human beings, being that in the United States, in Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, or Israel, or anywhere else. It doesn't, Hamas, it doesn't matter who it is. When you are a perpetrator of violence, sorry?
I said tyranny is tyranny.
Tyranny is tyranny, exactly. Right. The perpetrators of violence should be singled out. And we should not, in my view, blame the victims. And that happens quite a bit. All right, I need to wrap up, I guess. And I just want to say that as we speak, Prime Minister Netanyahu is living in a Palestinian home.
Palestinian.
Home. Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan and his family owned that house. And in 1949, when the Netanyahus moved to Israel, they were given that house. Maybe at some point Netanyahu can write a story about him living in that house and the impact of that on Dr. Kanaan and his family. Now I want to just close by saying that I dream of a day in which human rights laws and international laws, justice and fairness are applied equally to all human beings without reference to privilege, to their color, to ethnicity or religion. And I dream of a day and look forward to it in which the life of a Palestinian child will be as valuable as an Israeli child. And I would like to have the dream and dream of a day and look forward to it when all people who live in the place, the Holy Land they call their home, will live in peace and harmony with freedom, equality, and justice for all. Thank you.
I want to invite up Kendra Dira Brookhausen to share some remarks.
How long? Take your time, Vera.
No. I respect everybody's time.
5 minutes.
My name,
It's on.
it's on? We're good? My name is Kendra Vera Brookhuizen, which means, like Dr. Al-Khadir Ansari, there's a lot of explaining when I give it over the telephone and people try and match it up with how it's spelled. My father's family came from the Netherlands. They were once upon a time Jews in Bremen in Germany, and they crossed to the Netherlands in 1800, and part of the family stopped being Jewish very quickly, intermarried with local Dutch Calvinist folks. And so by the time the Nazis came around, my father's branch of the family was unidentifiable as Jews. So they suffered through the hunger winter and Nazi occupation, as did the rest of the Netherlands, but they were not explicitly targeted. Although later, when I did some research on developing a course about the Netherlands and the Shoah, the Holocaust, I realized that about 23 of my family members had in fact gone through Westerbork transit camp and to death camps in the East. My mother's family, on the other hand, are from Iraq. They're from Basra, and they came to Kolkata along with many other Jewish merchants in the latter part of, the early part of the 19th century. And so My mother came to the States illegally when she was 7. She and my grandmother came and overstayed their tourist visa for a couple of years until an act of Congress was passed to naturalize them. And I say this to share that my family is not Israeli. My family does not have that deep connection to the land. And for me, the way I learned about Israel and my family was from my grandmother, who would go frequently with groups from the B'nai B'rith organization that she was part of. And when she spoke of Israel, her face would light up with pride, and she would pull out these photo albums and all of the places that she went. And it gave her such pride that she tried to share with me in being Jewish to go there. And so that was the only part of the story, really, that I knew for a lot of my time growing up. And then when I was in cantorial school, I went to Israel because I thought it would be irresponsible to be ordained without ever having been. And I spent most of my time in Jerusalem. And I went to Safed for 3 days, so when we were describing, it was all, many of the sites you described are in my heart and in my memory, and I know how beautiful it is there and how hard it must have been to leave. I can imagine. And one of the things I was able to do was to go to Bethlehem, and also to go to Jericho, and then to come back into Jerusalem. And so I took a bus from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, no problem, no issues, city bus, got off, walked around, went to the Church of the Nativity, and then I asked a cab driver to take me to Rachel's tomb, to Kever Rachel. And he said, okay, you sure? I said, yes. And he took me to the outside of a checkpoint, and he dropped me off, and he said, I can't go any further. I'm so sorry, you're gonna have to go through here on your own. I had my 5-month-old with me. And this was the winter of 2014, so not long after 2013. And this was also right after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, which you may remember in Paris at that time. So my baby was strapped to me, and I walked through the checkpoint, and I saw all the cement, and I saw almost nobody else. It was the middle of the day. Finally, I got to a screening machine, and I eased my kid out of the carrier, and I bent down and I kind of took off my shoes and I took off my belt, and I started piling all of these things onto the belt and my passport. And a Palestinian man was behind me, and he looked at me taking all these things off, and he saw my US passport and he said, you don't need to do all this. And I looked at him and he said, yes, I do, thinking anybody who goes through this checkpoint, of course, would need to do the same thing. And that was my first introduction, that was my first personal introduction to what it feels like to live without freedom of movement for Palestinians, and how you can feel in your body, how unjust that is. I heard a lot of that in this book. One of the things that struck me, the differences between Dalia and Bashir's stories, and in the clip that you folks played, the summary, you hear at the end that Dalia and some of the children in the center are able to replant the lemon tree, and Bashir can't get there. He's not allowed to go. And I think that until we are talking about a situation where people enjoy the same freedom of movement, it's not pointless, but it is so hard to even begin to dream of achieving peace. If one set of people can move and the other can't, if one set of people can return and the other can't, if one set is still carrying keys to houses that remain in their families' hearts and names and have no ability to go back there, and another group of people are living there and can't conceive of a way to allow that population to return, then just like Dalia and Bashir in the book, you come to a point where conversation doesn't stop, but it doesn't move you forward anymore. And the conditions of justice and conditions of equality are prerequisites to any meaningful peace. I see the time. Okay, one more thing. I'm a cantor. I spend a lot of my time with Jewish liturgy, spend a lot of my time with Jewish song. Woven throughout Jewish liturgy is the words about returning returning back to Zion, returning back to Jerusalem. We pray about it, some of us, in our liturgy. And certainly the song Hatikva, the Israeli national anthem, embodies that longing. And that is the same longing that breathes in every word of this book and in everything the two of you have said for Palestinians. And I have been slapped in the face over and over this year with how difficult it has been for Israelis and other Jews to recognize that that longing is the same. The longing in Hatikva and the longing of Palestinians who have been expelled by the Nakba and since to return to their land is the same longing. And we can choose. We can choose to continue to say, it's pie, and I have more, and you have less, or you have more, and I have less. Or we can choose. We can choose something different. We can choose to give up on being justified in order to survive and to thrive together. And that has been the substance of my prayers for this year. That is what I hope that we can continue to work for in these conversations and elsewhere. And that this is where it begins, right? Hearing one another is where it begins. But this cannot be where it ends, or 10 years later we are going to be having these same conversations. And even more death and destruction and displacement will have followed. So, God willing, more can grow when we soften to it.
So I think we're going to have a final reflection from Shaheen, and we'll take a little bit of time for group conversation after.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, Vera. Thank you for your beautiful reflection. I try not to cry. I'm going to share a moment from Dahlia's reflection from the book, which moved me profoundly. And so when Dahlia was little, 7 years old, she finds the star, the crescent and the star, which is the Islam symbol. And she picks it up and says, no, this is not an Arab house. And she clambers it and throws it away. Towards the end of the book, she's all grown up, and so she reflects on that. And I think that reflection is so beautiful, and that really made me cry. And I could connect with her reflection to the present situation in Gaza as well. So I'm just going to read a little bit. Dahlia had been thinking of the time when as a little girl she had wrenched the star and crescent, the symbol of Islam, from the top of the gate in the house in Ramla and thrown it away. It was so beautiful, she said. I wished I could put it back. I was ashamed of what I did. One night, as she continued to think about it, and to what to do with the house, the angel Gabriel came to Dahlia in a dream. He was perched, hovering just there at the top of the gate where the crescent had been. Dahlia said, and he was looking at where the symbol was, and he was smiling. He was blessing the house, he was blessing me, and he was giving a blessing for what I wanted to do with the house. So I was really moved by this, and this made me cry because the respect she was showing. And I thought about the mosques in Gaza. All the mosques are destroyed now. And they have they don't have any place to pray. And as Vera pointed out, the freedom of movement, right? And in the book, Bashir could see Jerusalem, but he couldn't travel there to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. A house of worship is a house of worship. Your God and my God, as the Quran says, we all have the same one Almighty God. I call God in Arabic Allah. Jesus called God in Aramaic Allah, and my Jewish friends call God Elohim. So Allah, Allah, Elohim, these three names share a common linguistic root. We all come from the same source. And Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we are from our father Abraham. We are cousins through his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, and our mothers, Sarah and Hagar. We are all one. We are all one humanity. So let's work together towards mutual flourishing and healing. Let's see all of humanity as an equal shareholder in the pursuit of happiness. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to us. Thank you.